everyone, and welcome back to the F2 show by Inside F2. Joining me for this one to reflect on a spectacular round in Budapest, Luke and Aaron. And Aaron, let's get into it. It was quite something, wasn't it? The battling up and down the grid, particularly in the sprint race and towards the end of the feature race, even by Formula 2 standards, were pretty outrageous, right?
It was mad, wasn't it? The racing on the Budapest circuit was incredible. This weekend had so many twists and turns. The only thing we knew which way it was going was the circuit itself, because that had so many twists and turns as well. But we knew they were coming. The action, you didn't know where it was coming from next. It was just amazing.
Luke, can I say, I'll admit something. I've never been the biggest fan of Budapest, to be quite honest. I don't mind it as a circuit. It's definitely not one of my favourites, not one that I look forward to every year. But in fairness, it does deliver every year, and it definitely delivered this weekend, didn't it?
Yeah, it was Budapest used to have the reputation of being a bit dull, a bit tedious with one-stop races and so on in Formula 1. But in Formula 2, especially the past year, it's delivered. We saw in 2020 as well, and there was the battle at the end of the feature race. I believe Callum Arlott was involved there, and they were very close for battling for the win up to the line. And this weekend was more of the same with the big tyre delta they have with the hard and the soft tyre. It creates a lot of good racing in the feature race especially. And with it being so hard to pass and so hard on the tyres, it makes it a bit tricky for the drivers to keep their cool in those temperatures with it being so humid out there. And it's coming into its own, Budapest. It's a good track.
Definitely. We're going to be talking about a return to form for ART and for Victor Martins. We're also going to be discussing Richard Verschoor's yo-yo weekend, Kushmani's maiden win, and all of the incidents from this weekend, because there are plenty of them for us to get into. But there is only one place to start. Kimi Antonelli. He won the feature race on Sunday. A sprint race win last time out in Silverstone, and obviously a feature race win this time out. Aaron, Kimi Antonelli has taken off in Formula 2. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you called it with your post on social media after his win at Silverstone. A star is born, and he really, well and truly was. I mean, he showed that he had the speed, and the car was set up very well in the sprint race. Okay, he was on the softer tyres, but he showed he could get the job done when he needed to. Okay, the soft tyre didn't work out for him in the sprint race, but come Sunday morning, he was the soft tyre was very much his friend, and it was absolutely game changing for him. And the thing is, I think in that situation, you can get a bit carried away with, I have to make all these passes so quickly. Like I sit so much on like a game. You know you need to get past everybody to make best use of your tyres, but you need to get it done cleanly because you don't want the guy at the front to get away. And what impressed me most was the fact that not only did Kimi keep his head, but he took two drivers in three corners at the restart.
Yeah.
It was Hauger and Enzo Fittipaldi, I think it was. And without that, he would have lost time. It would have wrecked his tyres. He'd have had more laps in traffic through the middle sector. And it just set him up perfectly. Then he ticked off the other two, and off he went. He won by like 12 seconds in the end, 12.5 seconds over Victor Martins. And Victor Martins is no slouch, but he had absolutely no defence. And not only did Kimi scythe through his opposition, once he got in front, he just disappeared. He was like, see you later, guys. I'll be, putting my feet up by the time you guys get to Parc Ferme. So all credit where credit's due. There's still some question marks from Mercedes, I think, about what to do with him. We've spoken about it a lot on this podcast, and I think just put him in the Merc, honestly. If they to sort of round that point off, they can't have signs just for 2 years to drop him again, because what's the point in that? You might as well put Antonelli in the Merc. So, hashtag put Antonelli in the Merc.
That's a long hashtag, that one. I do agree. Before we get onto the Formula 1 point, Yeah, I just want to say that his move. So I've watched his onboard for the 2 laps after the safety car. It's on Formula 2 socials. Go and check it out if you haven't done already. But it is like full PlayStation mode, and everyone else is on amateur. It is literally just driving through. And those moves are not easy, by the way. I know he's on a fresher rubber, but he made them look a lot easier than they actually are. And we've seen so many drivers in the past who have been on fresher rubber, and it's taken them too long to get past drivers in their opening couple of laps when the tyres are at their best, and they haven't been able to do it. The tyres have dropped off or whatever. I don't know. I do wonder if he learnt from his Saturday how to look after that soft tyre, and it helps him on the Sunday, and maybe that's a bit of a blessing in disguise what happened on Saturday. But for me, flawless performance from Kimi Antonelli. But even early on in the race, we saw that move on Zane Maloney on, I think it was lap 4 of the race, where he sent it in a part of the track that you wouldn't usually overtake. He then, Zane Maloney tried to get back past. He stayed calm, and then he just sent it back up the inside of Zane Maloney. For me, a very, very impressive weekend from Kimi Antonelli. And Luke, would you agree his best weekend in Formula 2? And also, where do you stand on Antonelli to Formula 1?
Yeah, this is definitely Antonelli's best weekend. He got the sprint race win in Silverstone. Earlier in the season, he was making a few mistakes, like in Jeddah and in Australia, but in more recent races over the summer, he's really ironed those out. And now he's starting to really mature a bit. It was a big jump coming from Formula Regional and missing Formula 3. And I think a few errors early in the year were expected, but now he's really coming into his own, and his qualifying has got a bit better. With Formula 1, it's difficult to say. I think he will be good enough for Formula 1. Whether Mercedes are ready to put up with the inevitable mistakes he will make early next year, if he does replace Lewis Hamilton, who knows? I mean, they don't want to make the same mistake they did 10 years ago when they lost Max Verstappen to Red Bull. They have the option of maybe putting him in the Williams. Potentially, I could see him at Williams next year to have that sort of year or two of learning with less spotlight on him. But maybe throwing him in the Mercedes alongside George instead of, like Aaron was saying earlier, to give Sainz 2 years and just give the kid a chance. And he's shown in every championship he's done, even GT cars, he can be competitive.
Or the other alternative, which we spoke about last week on the podcast, is potentially with Logan Sargent not scoring any points or doing anything, to be quite blunt in Formula 1 at the moment. Have Williams got anything to lose by putting Antonelli in there after the summer break, and then he jumps into the Merc for 2025. I'm sure Toto Wolff wouldn't mind that, him having 10 races under his belt before he steps into Mercedes next year. So yeah, particularly if he goes and has a good weekend in Spa. Say if he goes and wins the feature race in Spa, could we see Kimi Antonelli in that Williams after the summer break? Let's wait and see. But yeah, obviously I'm glad that he did have a better Sunday, because I was slightly worried that the narrative was going to be about his poor Saturday if he didn't have a good Sunday where he bottled the win a little bit with those tyres. But he turned it around, and Kimi Antonelli was voted your driver of the weekend on InsideF2.com and across Inside F2 social media channels at Inside F2. So yeah, Kimi Antonelli, your driver of the weekend, voted by you, the fans. Okay, second place for Victor Martins in the feature race, and a double podium actually this weekend. Is that a bit of a return to form, Aaron? Obviously, he was fighting for the win at Silverstone as well. That's 2 feature races in a row he's been fighting for the win, and obviously a double podium this weekend.
Yeah, ART absolutely seem like they've got their act together. This is more like the French team that we used to know from years gone by, fighting at the front, and this is the Victor Martins performance levels we thought we were going to get throughout this season. And we kind of saw the performances from Antonelli and Martins that we expected at the start of the year. Less so Wally Behrman, but he's
we'll get on to that.
He's in Formula 1 already. He's put his feet up. It doesn't matter to him anymore. So, but yeah, Victor Martins, excellent weekend. Obviously, third on the road in the sprint race, elevated to P2. After Vachour's disqualification, but of course we'll talk about that more later. Looks set to win the feature race. Launched from 5th to 1st.
Mega start.
At the start, yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay, there was a big space not filled by Isaac Hadjar in front of him, so he got a nice clean run. But still, to launch from 5th, even to beat 3 cars down to turn 1 is impressive. And to take the lead, that was superb. It made his race. He was really unfortunate. Well, he was fortunate with the first safety car. He was less fortunate with the second one. It's the swings and roundabouts of motorsport, isn't it? Sometimes it breaks your way, sometimes it doesn't. But he still came home with a P2. So, he'll be disappointed to have lost the win, but still it's consistent, isn't it? That's what you want. Qualify in the top 10, secure a couple of podiums, or at least top 5 and a podium, and you take home some really good points. And if you do that majority of the time, you'll find yourself in the championship hunt. But sadly for Victor, it's come a little bit too late to make a bid for the title. But, it just shows what he's capable of.
P11 in the standings, we've just had a look. 1 point away from the top 10. He's not really anywhere near the top 5, 6 still. So, not quite where Victor Martins would have wanted to be, albeit a much better weekend this weekend. Aaron alluded to Isaac Hadjar there not being in his grid spot. And Luke, I could not believe it when we turned on our screens to watch Formula 2, and Isaac Hadjar is not starting from P3 in the feature race. And he was saying on the radio, he was questioning how they can make these mistakes. He was saying, how can we make these mistakes at this level? Luke, agree with him there? And how costly could this be for his championship, particularly when Paul Aron and Zane Maloney didn't score points, which again we'll get onto in a bit.
Yeah, I agree with Isaac. You can't make mistakes like that in Formula 2, and not at this level on the verge of Formula 1 and the amount of money that these guys are putting in. With Isaac, it could have been a lot more costly if Paul Aron didn't do what he did and make the mistake. But he's still leading the championship, and this isn't the time to panic for Isaac with 5 rounds to go. He still has a decent enough points advantage over Paul Aron. And it's good for him that going into Spa, there's only a few days before Spa rather than another week or even more for him to clear his head after a tricky weekend in Hungary and move on. But we know how good he is, and there's all the talk of Formula 1 as well. And so this isn't the time to panic for him, and he still has a good shot at winning the championship.
The thing is, though, Aaron, is yes, it's good that he didn't lose out on points to Paul Aron and Zane Maloney, but he also didn't gain on them on a weekend where they both, definitely Paul Aron made a mistake, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's still costly, right? He's still going to look at that and think, oh, you know what? He's lost out. He's lost out, right?
Yeah, it became an opportunity to extend the lead, and I think he was starting on the harder tyre originally from the grid. So he'd have run longer, he'd have done a similar strategy to Antonelli, and probably would have ended up winning the race. Obviously, I think with Hadjar in the pit lane, Paul Aron knew, he needed to make a good start. He didn't. And then he made that error because he knew he had an opportunity to gain ground, and he kind of just messed it up a bit, and that can happen. That's motor racing. But for Isaac, it suddenly became, oh no, it's all going to get away from me to, oh, hang on, I can actually build my lead still, despite all that. And yet somehow they managed to finish 18th. So he won't be best pleased, because the way it all panned out, he could have been on the winning strategy had he been on the grid. But who knows? It could have been a completely different run down to turn 1. Who knows what would have happened? And he'll just be super frustrated that he's come away from a weekend with no points in the feature race, and you just need to keep scoring those points. But he plummeted down the order after that second safety car. I genuinely thought he'd had an error, but then I realised that other drivers were just falling by the wayside, and it was their tyres. They had absolutely no defence, and prime example was Antonelli at the front.
Tyre management was definitely something to. Well, it was crazy this weekend, wasn't it? On the tyre wear. So we've just spoken about it there, but obviously Paul Aron and Zane Maloney came together. Aaron, what did you make of that incident? Not great for Paul Aron. Obviously not Zane Maloney round. I actually felt for Zane Maloney, who both races comes away from this weekend with no points, and none of that is due to anything he did. It's a car reliability issue, followed by being hit round by Paul Aron, right?
Yeah, it's just bad luck for Zane there. The move by Antonelli was made even more impressive, or were important really, because it got him out of harm's way. So he was the one. Zane Maloney was the one in the way when Aaron launched his attack on Dennis Hauger and got it slightly wrong. It was the smallest of nudges. It really, really was. And honestly, it shouldn't result in both drivers being out of the race. They shouldn't. I don't like the fact that they don't have anti-stall on these cars. They should be able to recover the car from there. They shouldn't be losing the engine. And Aaron was in a tricky position right on the apex of turn 2. And if you don't see the yellow flags, if you're not paying attention, you're going to have yourself an accident. So there is a safety element there, but also from Aaron's point of view, it was just an awful mistake. It was a tiny mistake with huge consequences, and he will be absolutely kicking himself for it. A little bit rookie-ish, but it's close racing, lost a little bit of downforce. It can happen, but he will be absolutely kicking himself for it.
Yeah, definitely. We could do a whole new podcast, by the way, on the reliability of the cars and stalling. And I'm sure Zane Maloney after this weekend would offer to come on as a guest to discuss that and maybe have a little bit of a moan about that. So we're not going to go into that. Luke, do you think that Paul Aron is feeling the pressure a little bit? A few people saying that that may be the case. He may be feeling the pressure. Obviously, didn't score for the first time in Silverstone, no podium, and then obviously bottling it from the lead this weekend. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? Is he feeling the pressure a little bit after a really strong start to his rookie season?
I think so. It's always very tricky coming into Formula 2 as a rookie, and he's done so well, being so consistent, building up the points, and it was inevitable that he was going to have the odd mistake here and there. But it's racing. Even Antonelli and other guys have been making mistakes this year, and he's got the perfect chance this weekend at Spa to move on. But the thing is with Aaron, he can't let this get him down, especially ahead of the summer break and after the summer break with tracks like Qatar, where he's less familiar than with other tracks in Europe. So I think he is feeling the pressure a little bit. It's always inevitable when you creep closer and closer to Abu Dhabi in the championship. But he knows what he's doing. He's experienced enough to bounce back.
Yeah, definitely. I think Paul Aron is almost, by starting the season as well as he has, he's almost mounted that pressure on himself. Whereas if he hadn't had as good a start to the season as he did, then maybe, the errors wouldn't necessarily be showing as much. So it's almost a credit to him that he has started the season so well we're asking these questions. So he did pick up a 10-place grid drop for his next race, which will obviously be for the sprint race rather than the feature race. I'm sure he'll be glad that those 10 places will be in the sprint race. Aaron, I wanted to ask you about that actually, because first of all, obviously the 5-place grid drop for his collision with Maloney. I think that's fair. I think everyone's in agreement with that. Ollie Behrman, he got a 5-place grid drop for forcing Ollie Behrman off the road, which I thought was, a little bit harsh. And should we see penalties if the penalty is earned in the feature race? Should we see it applied to the feature race rather? Because he's going to get 10 places for the sprint, which is arguably the less important race in the weekend. But he committed those offences in the feature race. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a get out of jail free if it's applied in the sprint, doesn't it? Because only the top 8 score points. So let's say Paul Aron qualifies 9th, he'll start 19th. So it does reduce his chance of scoring points. It doesn't completely eradicate it because there could be an accident, well-timed safety car, things like that. So, yeah, it's a bit tricky, but I suppose if they just apply it to the driver's next race, that's fair enough. Otherwise you get a little bit convoluted with trying to apply certain incidents to certain races, and it doesn't quite match up. At least it's one rule that they know will work and everyone can work to it. But yeah, the 5 places for forcing Behrman off track. No one wants to see drivers forcing others off the track because that can lead to major problems. But to get a 5-place grid penalty for it just seems a bit harsh. Really.
I agree. Really harsh.
Just very heavy-handed. I don't even remember it being like investigated. I think it popped up on the screen as like noted. I don't think they were investigating it. They must have just looked at it afterwards and gone, well, let's just, rub more salt in the wounds or something. Poor bloke. I mean, at least they're all out of the way at once in the sprint race. I suppose you can take that. I mean, the best case scenario, he qualifies on pole, starts 11th and roars back through the field and just sort of goes, well, it made absolutely no difference. I still finished 5th or whatever.
Yeah.
And then goes on to win the feature race. And suddenly his title hopes are back on. And we're having a very different conversation. So I look forward to that next week when we record this.
I want to talk about Kush Maini, maiden winner in the sprint race. Kind of gifted. We're going to get onto that in a minute. But it was Kush kind of did everything he needed to do, didn't he, Luke? It was a good drive, and he's had a bit of misfortune in the last few rounds. So nice to see him bounce back and return to form, right?
Yeah, it was a great drive from Kush. We know it was a little bit lucky with what happened with Richard for sure, but it's motor racing. You have luck sometimes. And it's good for Invicta as well to have both of their drivers having a victory now, and they're up there leading the teams championship, I believe. So championship, I think. So, and it's been a good season for Kush. He's been in and around the top step of the podium and scoring some podiums in sprint races. So for him to finally get that breakthrough, that's a big confidence boost for him going into Spa. And he's been very consistent as well, and not really making a lot of mistakes. And he's been driving well on tracks he's driven before, and he's using all his experience in the best way he can.
Yeah, 14th different winner in Formula 2 this season, which is a new record. The record was last season, 13 different winners. Shows how competitive Formula 2 has been this season. And only 8 drivers in the field haven't won a race this season, which is absolutely crazy to think. But yeah, obviously Kush Maini, really happy for him, buzzing for him. It was a really good performance by him. But you've got to feel for Richard Verschoor, don't you, Aaron? It crosses the line first, yet again. Crosses the line first, and then finds out a couple of hours later that actually the win isn't his, and he's had that taken off of him. He said in the press conference, he's like, I'm just going to wait. Even in the feature race on Sunday, I'm just going to wait a couple of hours before I even celebrate, because you don't know what's going to happen. He's got to be the unluckiest guy in Formula 2 ever, isn't he, Aaron?
If he didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck at all. I mean, he is literally...
Not far away from that.
Yeah, he is like... Mark Webber used to be, honestly, the most unlucky bloke in Formula 1. His engine would die, his gearbox would fail, wheels would fall off. You name it, it happened to him. He went somersaulting over other cars when trying to overtake them. Richard Verschoor is the Mark Webber of Formula 2. If it can happen to him, it has happened to him, or it will happen to him in the near future. I mean, they say black cats are unlucky, and if you cross them on Friday the 13th, I think he's walked past an entire herd of them at one point in his life. The poor guy cannot catch a break. He wins brilliantly, and then it gets taken away from him. Arguably, his very best win, he's managed to keep. But, it's so unfortunate, and we hate it when races are changed, especially race winners are changed hours after the fact. It's horrible for the drivers. It's agonizing for the fans because you celebrate it. And especially for the Dutch fans, Richard Verschoor is, he's going to be well recognized within Dutch racing fandom now, and mostly for the wrong reasons, in the fact that he keeps having these victories taken away from him. But what you can't deny is the fact that he does get the job done on the track. So regardless of how many wins he loses, anyone who's looking to hire Richard Verschoor should know that he is a safe pair of hands. And actually, you give him the right equipment, you put him at the front, he knows what to do. He can get the job done. So let's try and put a positive spin on this. He actually did the job on the track, and he's shown that he's a quality driver. So if he's not in Formula 2 next season, I expect to see him in a decent level of machinery and doing good things.
Yeah, I could see him doing a good job in sports cars, for example. So yeah, fingers crossed that is the case for Richard Verschoor, who yeah, as I said, it was actually a brilliant performance in the sprint race, to be honest with you, and I was absolutely gutted for him when I saw that news come through. We put it out on socials on at Inside F2, and yeah, really felt for him. But that sprint race was wild, wasn't it? We saw near the end of that race, Aaron, we saw Ollie Behrman, Jack Crawford, JM Correa, all three of them off the road. I think by the sounds of it, Alex Jakes and Alex Brundle in commentary were watching through their fingers, thinking that they were going to come together. I think Alex Jakes said in commentary, we're just waiting for all three of them to pirouette. But actually, in the midst of all of that, it was actually JM Correa who went from behind both of those two to in front of both of those two with a move around the outside of turn 3, up the inside of turn 4. Behrman and Crawford went off, and it was actually a great move from JM Correa, wasn't it?
Oh, it was fantastic. So to put a little bit of context on this for me, I was watching the sprint race on my phone while I was at a sort of tea room in the New Forest near where I live. So I had no audio, and I'm with family. So I'm watching it, just sort of keeping half an eye on what's going on. This crazy race is developing, and I see these cars go 3 wide through turn 3 at Hungary, and I'm like, at least 2 of these are going to be upside down, aren't they? The fact that they all came out the right way up with 4 wheels and continuing is absolutely incredible. I think, and Luke, surely you agree with me on this, this is the drivers showing their skill to place their cars perfectly and use all the track and a bit more to just, sort things out between them. It's great awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It's especially in Formula 2 at such a high level, and at that corner you don't see that many overtaking with them going 2 wide, let alone 3 wide. So, and for them to return to the track without any contact at all, it was super.
Even when rejoining, I thought Jack Crawford was going to take one of them out when he rejoined the track. So, superb racing by all 3 of those guys, particularly JM Correa, who obviously gained on that occasion. And I want to talk about Ollie Behrman, actually. Aaron, I know you're obviously a big fan of Ollie Behrman, but struggled again. His teammate competing for the win in both races. And, I just don't know. It feels like with both Prema and ART at the moment, one does well, one doesn't. And I don't know whether that's a setup thing. One goes one way, one goes the other way, and it just doesn't work. I don't quite know what's going on. But, when Behrman seems to do well, Antonelli's struggling, and vice versa. And when Victor Martin's done well, Zach O'Sullivan came, I think it was P20 in the sprint race. Not what you'd expect from a driver as good as we know Zach O'Sullivan is. What's going on with Prema and with Ollie Behrman? I think, by the way, I was saying to you just before the show that Ollie Behrman, I think it was lap 7 of the feature race, and Antonelli's P4, Behrman's P6. They're separated by only a few seconds. Obviously, strategy played into it, absolutely safety car. But Antonelli goes on to win the race. Behrman finishes at P15. How can you explain that? It just doesn't make any sense because we know Ollie Behrman's a better driver than that, right?
Yeah, we do. But I think the tyre strategy has a lot to do with this. I think Ollie started on the soft compound, moved to the hards at the first safety car, and then the second one came out, and he joined Isaac Hadjar in just plummeting down the order. Absolutely no way of fighting them off. Even the engineer was like, you're going to lose as little time as possible. And he's just like, I'm trying. Now be quiet. He had his like Fernando Alonso, Kimi Raikkonen moment. Leave me alone. I know what I'm doing. No more radio. He was just you could tell the frustration there. That's the sort of weird sort of phenomenon around the Hungaroring, and Luke touched on it at the very start of the podcast. That it just the tyre delta, the offset between the tyres themselves, and the fact that it's a circuit that punishes the rubber as well. So if you're on old rubber and anyone has newish rubber, you are toast. You are absolutely toast. You've got no defense. You get so much more traction out of the final corner with that fresh tyre. And that makes the difference. You're in the slipstream. You're able to send it down the inside. Jobs are good, and see you later. On to the next one. But for Ollie, yes, he will be disappointed because he's a racer. He wants to do well, and he wants to win. But also in the back of his mind, he's got to think, look, I've got something that none of the other 21 drivers in Formula 2 right now have, and that is a Formula 1 contract. So he just needs to keep himself race sharp, show that actually he can work through the problems, and it's probably kind of good that he's having these struggles now rather than it's win, 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 get into a Haas, suddenly the car's not quite so good all the time. How do I deal with this? So it's really important for that building of the character and building of the person. We see it with young footballers all the time. They come into the team, they look like they're going to be world beaters, then teams work out how to play against them, and it can be a bit tricky for them. It's kind of good that Ollie's going through this. Don't be surprised if he wins a couple of races towards the end of the season, because we know he's got the skill and the talent. But when he gets to Formula 1, he'll be much, much better prepared. And that is what Formula 2 is inherently all about.
Yeah, he's just getting used to racing in P14, P15, because that's where Haas are going to be next season. It's perfect preparation for a Formula 1 season next season, right? No, I am joking. We all know that Ollie Behrman is better than that. P14 in the championship at the moment. No one has ever graduated to Formula 1 full-time and not finished inside the top 5 of the championship. Ironically, Ollie Behrman could be the first driver, if he doesn't finish inside the top 5, to graduate to Formula 1 outside of the top 5 of the Formula 2 Championship. So, and we all know he's a better driver than that. So let's wait and see. A couple of feature race wins could obviously catapult him up the standings. Rookie watch now. Luke, first time on the podcast this year with us, and we've got a new feature called Rookie Watch where we're having a look at some of the rookies that we haven't spoken about. We've obviously already spoken about Antonelli and his win. Were there any rookies that stood out to you this weekend? Miata was P18 to P8 in the race. I think Taylor Barnard and Villa Gomez were up there as well. Were there were they the guys who stood out for you or anyone else?
Yeah, I think Ritomo Miata drove really well this weekend. He's been slowly building up his confidence throughout the year. Coming from Super Formula, it's such a different culture, a different championship as well, and balancing racing and prototypes as well. He was racing at Le Mans and LMP2, so he's got a hectic schedule going on this year, and it was a good drive from him coming from the back of the field and scoring points on a track that is so difficult to pass on. And unlike a lot of the other guys that have come through the Formula 1 junior ladder in Europe, he doesn't know any of these tracks in real life. I think he's into his sim racing, so he's probably done loads of laps around these tracks on his sim, but it's very different in real life. And this was a good weekend for him to pick up some points after it's been a tricky season for him so far coming from Japan. So it was a good weekend.
Definitely. Aaron, anyone that stood out for you? Bortoletto, maybe, P4. He seems to be the guy in form at the moment, doesn't he, in terms of the guys at the top of the championship. Obviously, Hadjar, difficult weekend this weekend. Bortoletto seems to be the guy in form, doesn't he?
Yeah, another solid weekend from Bortoletto. He's slowly putting it together, a bit like he did last year in Formula 3. Just, pick up a couple of wins, tick off the other points, scoring positions, and put yourself in a really good position. I'm just going to see where he is in the championship. He's third. He's 30 points off Hadjar. So
he's well in with a shot. For me, he's well in with a shot, and he's the guy in form. So for me, he's the one to watch for the rest of the season, no?
Yeah, he might be. I mean, let's review this after Spa, because if Zane Maloney picks up the feature race win, or maybe Colapinto picks up the feature race win, then we're maybe looking at them as the form person coming to the second half of the season. But Gabby is, he's shown it in Formula 3. He knows how to put a championship win together, and that's something that none of the other 4 around him can say. Only Antonelli can really say that. But of course, that was a Freca championship that he just, he won out of Cantor. So it's quite different to putting it together with your regular point scores. But Bortoletto, with his F3 experience, and he might just be the hot ticket for the rest of the season, like you say.
It's almost too early for him to win the championship, though. He almost needs he needs to win it next season to put himself. The McLaren IndyCar seats, Formula 1 seats, they're all full, so he almost needs to win it next season, doesn't he? But yeah, no, great weekend. Another great weekend for Bortoletto. Moving into Spa, by the way, just before we wrap up. Winner in Spa last year, his debut win in Freca, Kimi Antonelli. Took his first record win at Spa last season. So, we'll see. We'll see how Spa goes because I think it could be quite a decisive weekend for this Formula 2 season. Do you not? Okay, let's take a look at the championship standings before we go then. Isaac Hadjar extends his championship lead despite a dismal Sunday for him. He leads Paul Aron by 18 points. Gabriel Bortoleto, as we've just mentioned, arguably the biggest winner from this weekend and the man in form. He moves above Zane Maloney into P3 in the standings. Feature race winner Kimi Antonelli moves up to P6 in the standings. He'll be hoping to push on from there. And Formula 2's latest winner Kushmani and Enzo Fittipaldi round out the top 10. And the team standings? Invicta lead the team standings for the first time this season, moving ahead of Campos by 6 points. MP Motorsport, High-Tech and Rodin remain 3rd, 4th and 5th. Difficult weekend for all of those teams. Prema were voted your team of the round on Inside F2 socials. They move above Dams into 6th, whilst ART remain in 8th. VAR, Trident and AIX round out the team standings. Okay, that's all we got time for today, but before we finish, we want to hear what your thoughts are on those things that we've discussed today. Will Antonelli finish the season in the top 5 of the championship? Will he kick on from here? Is Paul Aron feeling the pressure? And is Richard Verschoor the unluckiest driver in Formula 2 history? We think so. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.